3 minutes into that drive with nothing on my mind but a late lunch and a meeting I didn't want to attend. Red and blue lights exploded in my mirror and my stomach dropped in a way that had nothing to do with traffic laws and everything to do with history. You know what I mean. I pulled over anyway, slow and clean hands on the wheel, uniform pressed, badge shining, because that's what you do when you believe the system will recognize you if you do everything right. Yeah, that happened. I'd been wearing a badge for 16 years at that point, long enough to know the difference between a normal stop and something that already feels wrong before a single word is spoken, and the way those two officers walked up shoulders, tight hands hovering near their holsters. Eyes locked on me like I was a problem they'd been waiting to solve, told me this wasn't about speed or a broken taillight. This was about me. I was driving a county-issued SUV, government plates, department markings on the doors, full uniform on my body, and still the first thing out of his mouth wasn't a greeting or a reason, it was a command. Sharp and loud hands where I can see them, like I was a suspect and not a colleague, and when I calmly asked what the stop was for, he didn't answer. He just stared at me. That look people get when they've already decided who you are and they're daring reality to disagree. I told him who I was, where I worked, how long I'd served, and I even angled my body so the badge couldn't be missed. And his partner laughed. Not a joke. Laugh. Just that dry little sound that says, I don't believe you, and I don't respect you. And something in my chest tightened because I'd heard that sound before in stores, on sidewalks in my own neighborhood when I was younger. And here it was again, wearing a uniform and carrying a gun. They questioned whether the vehicle was mine, whether the uniform was real, whether I should be driving something like that, and every word felt less like an investigation and more like an accusation wrapped in disbelief, like the idea of me belonging behind that wheel just didn't compute for them. I stayed calm because calm keeps you alive in moments like that, and I suggested politely that they run the plates or call dispatch because one button press would clear this up in 60 seconds. But instead of doing that, the driver's jaw tightened, his hand drifted closer to his weapon, and he said, "We'll see about that." And that's when I knew this wasn't going to de-escalate on its own. When he ordered me out of the vehicle to secure the scene like we were in some high-risk takedown and not on the side of a quiet highway, I paused just long enough to tell them something important, that everything happening was being recorded. Their body cameras, my dash cam, my vehicle tracking system, all of it. And for a split second, I hoped that would snap them back to reality, but instead it made him angrier, like my confidence and knowledge of procedure felt like disrespect to him, like I wasn't supposed to know my rights or speak with authority. I stepped out slowly, sunlight catching the badge on my belt, thinking surely now it clicks. And instead he moved behind me and ordered my hands behind my back, and when I asked calmly what crime I was suspected of, he didn't answer. He just grabbed my wrist hard, not controlled, not trained, just forceful. And I didn't resist, because I knew how fast that story turns ugly if you do. While he held me there, his partner popped open the back of my SUV without asking, without consent, without cause, and started digging through my gear like he was hoping to find something. Anything that would justify what they were doing. And I watched county-issued equipment get tossed around like props while passing cars slowed and phones came out, and I made sure to say clearly and out loud that I did not consent to any search, that they had no warrant, that this was a violation of my rights. And the driver leaned in close and told me I thought I was smart, that I didn't show proper respect. And there it was, the real issue, not law, not safety, respect, submission, the idea that I should know my place even with a badge on my chest. Then the air changed. You can feel it when authority that actually understands the law walks into a situation, and I saw a command vehicle pull over across the median and a senior officer step out, the kind of person whose presence alone makes chaos hesitate. And when he got close enough to take in the scene, his face went from confusion to anger so fast it was almost startling. He demanded to know why one of his deputies was being detained, and suddenly the confidence drained out of those two officers like someone pulled a plug, voices shaky, excuses, thin, routine investigation, this suspicious vehicle, that, and none of it held up when he asked the simple question they couldn't answer. What was the probable cause? He ordered them to release me immediately, and they did, hands coming off me, like they'd just realized they were holding something radioactive. And as I rolled my shoulders and felt the marks on my wrists, I wasn't relieved so much as I was aware of how close this had come to going very differently if that vehicle hadn't pulled up when it did. The watch commander from their department arrived next, took one look, asked if they'd run the plates or verified my ID, and when they couldn't say yes, she relieved them of duty on the spot. Weapons and badges surrendered right there on the shoulder. And watching that happen was surreal. Not triumphant, just heavy. because all I could think about was how many people never get to see that part. How many people go home shaken and quiet because no one with rank shows up to stop it. The investigations that followed moved faster than anyone expected because video has a way of cutting through excuses, and my dash cam showed me calm and compliant from start to finish. But their body cameras caught something worse. A conversation before the stop, a few careless words about how I didn't look like I should be driving that vehicle, jokes about it being stolen, not a single mention of a traffic violation. And once that audio was out, the narrative shifted from misunderstanding to something much darker. The city held a press conference. The chief stood there apologizing, talking about values and trust, and then came the firings, both officers terminated, followed by criminal charges, because when you detain someone without cause, search without authority, and it's rooted in bias, that's not just a policy issue, that's a civil rights violation. At trial, the defense talked about good faith and split-second decisions, but good faith doesn't survive your own recorded words, and the jury didn't take long, guilty across the board. Prison sentences handed down, careers ended, and I didn't feel joy about it, just a grim understanding of what accountability actually sounds like when it finally arrives. I filed a civil lawsuit too, and I know how that looks to some people, like it's about money, but it wasn't. Not really. It was about forcing change, creating a record, making sure this wasn't brushed off as an isolated incident, and the settlement was significant. Yes, but more important were the reforms attached to it. Mandatory bias training, stricter body camera policies, data review on stops, early warning systems for complaints, civilian oversight with real power, and years of federal monitoring, the kind of changes that don't make headlines but quietly save people from being humiliated or hurt down the line. After all that, I went back to work, eventually moved into training, because if there's one thing this experience taught me, it's that fear and ego are a dangerous mix when they're wearing a badge. And I tell recruits now that your assumptions are not probable, because your discomfort is not a legal justification. And if you feel yourself getting emotional, step back, because the cost of being wrong is too high. Here's where it gets uncomfortable, and I know it will because it always does. Some people will say this was just two bad officers, and I understand why that's tempting. It makes the problem smaller, easier to digest. But those two didn't invent that mindset in a vacuum. They learned it somewhere, they practiced it somewhere, and they were allowed to do it until cameras made denial impossible. So the real question isn't just what happened to me, it's how many times it happened before when there was no supervisor crossing a median, no crowd filming, no clear evidence to force accountability. I still think about that day, about how close it came to being a headline instead of a lesson, about how easily calm professionalism can be misread as defiance when bias is already in the driver's seat. And that's why I'm telling this story, not for sympathy, not for praise, but because conversations like this are uncomfortable for a reason. So let me ask you honestly, and I want to hear it in the comments. What does justice look like in situations like this?